Ben Troy, we're coming to you live from a Nairobi hotel in Westlands, and this is a workshop by the East African Business Council in collaboration with the GIZ East African Community, and it's a workshop to validate a framework for private sector self-regulation of safety and quality of coffee and fresh fruits and vegetables. It is a 3-day workshop. It began yesterday, and of course it's set to culminate tomorrow, where the stakeholders will adopt the recommendations from the workshop. And to shed more light on this framework, I'm going to be having a word with some of the key stakeholders in this workshop. And I welcome to this live broadcast. This is KBC, the great KBC. Kindly just introduce yourself and just tell us more about this framework that you are coming up with.
Okay, thank you very much. Martin Kimanya, work for GIZ at the East African Community, and what we do is collaborating with East African Community in harmonization of standards, particularly in the sector of food. And in the course of doing that, we actually realize private sector participation in standards harmonization is very low, and ultimately we found that our small scale and medium enterprises are actually unable to comply with the EAC harmonized standards. And then we tried to look for the reasons for this, and we did find that they do not have very well organized coordinated systems for the control of food safety and food quality, and which are important parameters in compliance when you want to trade. And therefore we decided to collaborate with the East African Business Council in trying to collect private sector problem. It used looking at the international best practices in terms of trying to make sure that the private sector itself takes the leadership in terms of improving safety and quality of food, the intra-EAC trade, as well as for the export to EU and the other countries, because that's what the project which is supporting this is doing. And then we, after having collected the views, we realized that we need to develop a framework or a scheme can be harmonized at the level and be adopted by the all private sector associations of the and which participation in harmonization of EAC standards for food, and which can also in implementation and ultimately improve the safety of our but also the safety and quality of exports.
The media led up with such a framework, and why at this all time now? Why?
Yes, we know that this food, they take some kind of measures in order to comply with standards, and these standards, as I said, they relate to making sure that the food is safe and quality. These measures aren't adequately coordinated, so dealing with individual farmers or individual exporters in terms of making them comply, the government can be in partnership with the private sector associations. Here I'm talking about institutions like FPIC, I'm talking about institutions like Coffee Association, or Coffee Associations, partnering with them and make sure that we coordinate members actually take measures, deliberate measures, and take leadership in implementation of the standards. Once the traders take the leadership, there is more in terms of making sure that there is compliance with these standards. And therefore, we want them to have organized structures, have technical people, technical committees, leaderships that are responsible for standards, responsible for quality compliance, or the safety compliance, which will help them, meet the internal formal standards for food, but also meet the international requirements for export of food.
Maybe what role do you think the government can play or chip in making sure that you are all targets what you want to have it address, it's implemented?
Actually, this is an important element. This is an important thing to government, because by having the private sector people coordinated and organized, it will actually minimize the government control or regulation of the same. And therefore, the government role is actually, developing policies and guidelines which will help the government recognize schemes that will be developed by the private sector themselves. And once they recognize those schemes, it will actually minimize the number of inspections the government is doing in terms of making sure there is compliance in food safety or quality requirements. So the role of the government is trying to develop mechanism to recognize those private sector mechanisms that we are trying to adopt through this workshop. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, that has been one of the key stakeholders. This workshop that has been organized by the East African Business Council in collaboration with the GIZ East African Community Region. And of course, it's a workshop that is geared towards coming up with, validate a framework for the private sector self-regulation of safety and quality of coffee and fresh fruits. And of course, it's set to culminate tomorrow, where holders are scheduled. They are set to adopt the recommendations that will be coming from these workshops.